So how can I learn to be compassionate towards myself today and my past self, both of which received the abundant mercy of God?
You should be so consistent as a leader that when someone on your team has a problem, they already know what you're going to say.
He said, your sense of gratitude ends where a sense of entitlement begins. Do you think that there is that point? Like, I was driving here and I stopped being in Queen Creek and then I ended up in Santan. There was a sign that Queen Creek was done, but there wasn't a welcome sign for Santan.
Right.
You know? And so like sometimes you think you're in gratitude and then all of a sudden, oh, I'm no longer gratitude, I'm in entitlement. I think it's not that you are broken or not, it's what happens in that broken place. Do you heal? And does that healing actually make you stronger than you were before you were broken?
I think it was Dr. Crawford Loritz that says, when you're born, you look like your parents. When you die, you look like your decisions. I am so grateful for you to be in on this conversation. One of my favorite people in the world. I think I mean that. Is Scott Savage. Pastor Scott Savage, how are you doing today, brother?
Oh man, I'm fantastic. It is always a surprise for me when I hit the north side of Phoenix, how far it is from Anthem to Santan, you know?
Yes.
And so, but it's always worth the drive to come down here and hang out.
People wonder why I don't hang out. They're like, oh, he's a pastor in Phoenix too. I'm like, dude, he's 2.5 hours from where I am. So we're not, what do you mean hanging out? Yeah, so it's rough. So a lot of people in the East Valley like have like an isolation problem because it's like, how come you don't hang out with the rest of us in the West Valley? And it's like another state in my mind.
I mean, they say it's one city, but it is so not.
Yeah, that's a very loose term. But I'm grateful for it because I got funding because I was technically Phoenix church plant. So I'm not complaining.
No, not at all. Not
Well,
at all.
anyways, we've been friends for quite a while. I knew you from afar. You knew my father first.
Yeah, your dad and I sat in the back row of seminary together, and I tried to keep him from quitting because he is gifted as an entrepreneur and a missionary and an evangelist. And so sitting in a class, learning about the granular details of theology and the New Testament, he's like, I got to go save some people and get out of here. And, you know, and so I loved, you know, trying to keep him like, Billy, we got to graduate, you know?
That's so funny. I just love to think about that. So it must shock you to meet me because it's like, I'm not like that.
But when I first knew of you, you know, you were 14, 15, felt a call to ministry, passion to share the gospel.
Yeah,
like
true.
Typically they were bringing you in as this, like, I don't think it was patronizing. Maybe it was this like, you know, young kid who's going to share the gospel, like little Billy Graham evangelist, you know?
Yep.
So like to watch you on your journey, like not only like you and Jordan getting married, starting family, having kids, but just like even just your passions changing and growing and evolving and, you know, you guys, you know, starting the church, you know, pivoting through different locations and, you know, times a day, the whole thing.
Yeah. I think I was a weird mix. I really started preaching like at conventions.
Oh, yeah.
At like 16.
Uh-huh.
And it was a weird mix of like Paul Washer and Adrian Rogers. Oh man! And I throw in some Louis, and we got the trifecta.
Oh yeah!
Louis Giglio. I definitely preached that golf ball sermon.
I mean, there's that old line that we all start out as an echo, you know, and so
I think you have to.
And I think what was different is that like I started preaching at 20, but it was like before there were any cameras.
Yeah.
You know, and I preached for several years at this kind of alternative service, church within a church kind of thing. And then when the service ended, somebody deleted the server, so like the whole podcast was gone. We were kind of the first wave of podcasting on iTunes, and so it's all gone. So like it's you can't find it. Whereas
which you're probably grateful for, right?
I'm so grateful for. I wouldn't be a pastor anymore if, you know, like
Seriously.
There's just so many things I was like, oh, I can't believe I said that or did that. And yet for you, like you started, you know, vlogging so early, that you have all this footage, you know, and
that I've unlisted or private or
you know,
deleted.
and so it's funny because you've been on this journey and so much of yours is recorded and mine is not.
Yeah.
But I have the memories for sure, and hopefully I have the lessons as well.
Well, one thing I love, I'm shocked. It was like a year and a half ago, almost 2, that we got to, because it was fall of 2023. I think it was like September or something. And it was a great conversation. It was one of those podcasts where it didn't go viral, but there was so much value that I feel like almost every listener who did listen to our podcast like text me or emailed me.
Oh yeah.
It's been like, I was like, man, it was just like fireworks. Like we were just going back and
my
forth.
email list has grown substantially since then, and it's in my welcome sequence. And so I include it because it's a video, kind of my story and some teaching and stuff. and I get comments about it every week from people.
Oh, cool.
So I really appreciate that conversation. Go back to it. I'm like, okay, is there any more clips I can pull from this?
Oh, nice.
But that's where I've been trying to figure out a time to get down here, and both of us are in a busy season.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful to have.
I will
time.
say I've downgraded in the past. In the last podcast, we had TVs behind you. That whiteboard is magical for sermon prep. So.
I love it. I love it. Well, what's so funny too is like I can remember, when you first came to preach for us in Cornerstone, and how you were prepping has changed, how I was prepping has changed.
Yeah.
And so I just love that. I think we both share in common just a hunger to learn and get better. And
yes,
hopefully we keep that drive to ourselves, because if it gets too much beyond ourselves, everybody's worse off for it, because we're so maniacal about that. So
wow.
what I've had to learn in my own leadership is there's some things that like I can, put myself up to that standard, respect for myself. But if I push other people to that standard, sometimes they didn't ask for that. They don't want that. And so if I hold them to my standard, then sometimes it's unhealthy. And so, hey, this works for me. This is how I'm wired. But you find your own way to do the same principle, but it's going to look different.
Okay, I feel great about that. I think there's still a principle there. So like my principle is never stop learning. But that doesn't mean everyone in my church and my leadership buries their head in books like I do. But having that posture of humility and constantly learning from everybody in every stage of life is the principle.
Well, so never stop learning is great. For you, it may mean that you're always tweaking. Because you're always afraid that like there's a better way to do it, or you're not doing it well enough.
Afraid or excited.
Well,
like, it's a joy too.
Well, again, some people get excited. My wife loves reorganizing our house, so I'll go away and I will know that when I come home, a couch has been moved, a bed has been moved. Like nothing is in the spot it was before.
Yeah.
And so, whereas for me, like I put my stuff where I like it and then I leave it. I had a huge kind of Facebook post last year where I posted that we changed the sides of the beds that we sleep on.
Yeah, I remember that.
At least once a year.
Yeah.
And people were like, I've been married for 28 years. Our beds, hotels, other countries, it's always the same side of the bed.
Yes.
And so I think we can over spiritualize our preferences.
Yes.
And over spiritualize our process. And some of your processes that you're like constantly iterating and looking for a better way to do it, which is your way of never stop learning. Other people, they have their process, but they're learning the content that is in the process. And so I think you have to go, where does the principle play itself out, and how do I hold to the right part of it?
Yeah, that's so good, because I've had people reach out to me lately, and I might make a resource for pastors on some things that we figured out, but I've been like, I don't want you to copy and paste. I want you to create your own principles and pathways, and just here's how we've identified ours, and here's how that's happened in the life of like our church. But like, yeah, copy and paste. We shouldn't do an echo. We shouldn't just, do exactly.
I was at a one day like years ago with Craig Rochelle and Andy Stanley, and someone was asking about how they sermon prepped, and people wanted to know like, what color highlighters do you use, and what time of day, and they were just like, that's a very inexperienced question. I could teach you that, but then when I change, you're going to keep doing what I did, or I could teach you how I think, how I came to those decisions, my thought process, my values. That's what I can focus on. That's what we're doing today.
Brilliant.
I'm not going to get down into the granular things, because then you're going to copy that, and by the time you implement it, I'm going to change.
Because I'm blown away that you spent a whole Tuesday on sermon prep. I can't do that.
I don't do that anymore, though.
Well, you did. It was like 2 weeks ago on your Instagram.
I was there on Tuesdays doing that, but then I went to a lunch with somebody that I'm discipling, and then I had to be on a call, and then I came back to that. Whereas there was a season in ministry where like it was Tuesdays, don't call me, don't text me, I'm at home, I'm by myself, I don't ever take anything. Now I'm in a season where, we're preparing to go to a capital campaign. I'm on a call later today with the city about our designs for our building, like it's a different season. So like I'm not able to do that. And if I like you got to have a whole day.
I'm just blown away. Like for me, if it's past 2 p.m., that's the no Trey zone as far as creating. So that's what I'm speaking. Like you went back. I'm like, that's a Wednesday morning thing now, because like my brain is fried by 2 p.m. after meditating and making and creating. But that's a good segue anyways. Seasons. So you and I are in totally different seasons. Of life, of ministry, leadership. And one principle you said last time that actually helped me a lot is you said, don't judge your past seasons. Don't belittle them. You were just doing the best of what you had.
Yeah.
And that's the process of growth. I thought that was really helpful.
Well, I think you were in a season where you had made some decisions, almost made some decisions, or wanted to go down some paths, and then you weren't allowed to. And I think you have a very kind of natural, quick self-critical.
Yes.
Like you're your own worst critic.
Oh, I was very critical of myself when you were around last time.
And I mean, and there were places I think to learn and grow through what happened. But I felt like I think you were judging your past based upon the knowledge you had in the present.
Yes.
That's one of the worst things to do, because you were doing the best you could with the information you had at the point.
Yeah.
And who you were at that stage. And so if Psalm 103 is correct, that God is slow to anger, abounding in compassion, longing to forgive, then God is more compassionate with us than we are with ourselves. So how can I learn to be compassionate towards myself today and my past self, both of which received the abundant mercy of God? And so I felt like, you needed to hear that, hey, like at some point you're going to look back on today the way you're looking then if you don't learn to give yourself more grace and show up with the same compassion that God does.
So you've been in ministry long enough to know that always happens.
Oh, yeah, because there's stuff right now that I'm doing that I'll look back 5 years from now and go, savage. What were you thinking? Or man, you blew the opportunity, and so I think you have to learn if you don't learn to do that today with your present and your past, then in the future, you're going to have to relive the same experience.
The other thing I've noticed, though, so I'm really enjoying the season I'm in. So if the year and a half ago versus now, like I have so much more gratitude for where we're at. There's even where, and I think you'll get into this, like, so I've had opportunities of like relational conflict and strife, but I've grown so much through it now. Like, oh man, what's his name? I mention him all the time. It's that he has that whole idea of, like resilience is forged, not found.
Is this Todd Bolsinger?
Thank you. I knew you'd do it. So I remember being fascinated with Todd Bolsinger. Actually, so we keep dancing around. I actually mentioned the California thing at my church Sunday. I haven't done that in a couple. Dude, that was over 3 years ago now, which is crazy. So I mentioned it because it made sense within the process of my sermon, and I felt like it was a good. Anyways, so I just hate that I'm bringing it up again. Like I promise I'm through it, but since it's a part of my story. The very next day when I came back home, I read all of Todd Bolsinger's Canoeing the Mountains. And that actually gave me like a vision, like to keep holding on. But I just remember that next book I read was about resilience. And even lately, I've just had these moments where a bad phone call comes in. Anytime we do a practice, like all hell breaks loose. And I use that literally, you know, and like I've grown to know, like, all right, we're doing the prayer practice in May. The end of April, beginning of May is going to be rough. And it has been. But like, I haven't lost my, I was thinking of the Grinch, almost lost my cool there. Like I haven't, it's like, oh, it's just amazing that like God can gift you that endurance where it's like, oh yeah, this is tough, but I'll make the phone call. I'll meet the person. I'll do this and I'll still enjoy my family tonight. But something I've noticed, I've had the spirit of gratitude for this season, but I can see how so quickly it can turn into pride or self-reliance.
Oh, yeah.
Or being too self-referential.
Yeah.
Like, look at, you know what I'm saying? Have you felt that? Like,
well, so there was an old business book that I think was called Only the Paranoid Survive. And so I do think that there is this piece, and I've been wrestling with this in my own leadership. Like, I don't want to live as a paranoid leader.
Right.
Because I think when you're paranoid, you don't get to appreciate the moment you're living in. There's a lack of peace and a presence of anxiety that I know is not how we were designed and created to live by the Lord. At the same time, there is a part of, I think, discernment and wisdom to, I think, part of that concept, which is, hey, you are never as solid and secure as you think you are. Yeah. That's the proverb, be careful that when you think you're standing firm that you don't fall.
Right.
And so I think part of it is just being aware is that like I have to always be attending to my foundation. I have to always be attending to the base that this is resting upon. And if people are involved, then there's going to be some nature of that is not as solid as I would like,
Yeah.
My dad used to always say, you're pastoring a parade. There's people coming in, there's people going out.
Wow.
And he lived in Las Vegas, and there at that point it was a 3-year turnaround for the average person there. And so it was super transient. But I think I learned from that and I'm having to step back into that kind of practice going, hey, I need to not take things for granted the way I'm taking them for granted.
Yeah.
Gratitude can be a part of that with that appreciation, but I do think sometimes we can be lulled into a false sense of comfort and security, and we need to go, hey, like I need to always just be aware and attentive to those things so that I'm not shocked when life happens or crisis pops up or people transition and things change.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's so helpful because it's like I want to keep my gratitude muscle. Like that's a beautiful thing to have. But something I'm shifting, and again, I'm so interested because you're quite a few steps ahead of me, just even timeline and ministry. So I love how we're in different stages of life, but also close enough where it's super relatable. I've realized, I think my first decade of ministry, I easily fell into self-pity because I always felt overlooked. I felt underappreciated. I felt like I was working really hard, but not really getting the results I expected. Even the people around me had these expectations on me and I was failing them. Even you saying 16, I was this quote unquote like poster boy in some senses. And then just life hits you. No one wants to follow a 22-year-old, like some of those things. And you're a great podcast host, listener, by the way, because you're not going, and ruining. So good job. I was just thinking that. Sorry. Squirrel. But now, and this is just, we've had just a little bit of, not to demean, I got to be careful here, but we've been, quote unquote, a lot more successful this past year than we've ever been, right? We've doubled in size, this, that, the other. God's given us provision and in a lot of great ways. So it's like, I'm filled with gratitude and joy, but also looking ahead, there's still so much to do. But like, it's like, I can see the enemy creeping in, like, okay, self-pity's not working as much. What about self-praise? What about like, wow, you are a good leader. And wow, like I've had people like now randomly give me gifts, of like, hey, we just want to bless your family, enjoy lunch today. And it's like, so, it's like, wow. Like I can just see right now I'm in the season. I'm like, this is insane that someone like, our family can mean so much to another family that they're sacrificing what they have to bless us. But I can see 10 years down the road, it's like, how come nobody gave me a gift card today? You know what I'm saying? Like I get to see how it can it's such a gift.
Yeah.
But you can turn it into something bad.
I quote lots of people. I don't agree with anything that everybody says.
Yes.
Because I don't agree with even my own stuff 5 years ago. So, but one of my favorite quotes about gratitude is from Furtick. And he said, your sense of gratitude ends where a sense of entitlement begins. And so I do think that there is that point. Like I was driving here and I stopped being in Queen Creek and then I ended up in Santan. Like and there was a sign that Queen Creek was done, but there wasn't a welcome sign for Santan.
Right.
And so like sometimes you think you're in gratitude and then all of a sudden, I'm no longer gratitude. I'm in entitlement.
Wow.
Like there's not like a sign that gives you the warning that you've moved from one to the other. You just wake up and go, oh, I actually shifted the place I was located in.
Well, that's because we still think we're in Queen Creek. Nobody likes Santan Valley, so none of us. But that's a great illustration.
But I do think that like, and I mean, I have a 21-day gratitude challenge on my website that people can go through that I've done, on a regular basis every November. But part of that process is that like in the same way that if you're not attentive to your physical health always, you're either getting healthier or you're not getting healthier. You're either moving towards gratitude or you're moving towards entitlement. And it's either one or the other.
There's no stagnancy.
No.
In the kingdom.
No. And that's where again I think that like I don't want to be paranoid, but I want to be attentive. I want to be eager. I want to be vigilant. I want to stay on top of those things because I know that I'm not above anything.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I'm so grateful this hard season. You've read Eugene Peterson's, it's about Eugene Peterson, The Burning of My Bones. Have you read that?
I have not.
Oh my gosh.
That's the,
Wayne Collier?
Yeah, Wayne Collier, yeah.
I love that book so much. It's a reread every year, but there's a whole chapter about the Badlands. And for him, I think it was 8 to 10 years of just complete like misery for him. Like he just called it the Badlands. It was just a hard time in ministry. Nothing worked. And if I just work 5 times harder, no, I get like 5 times less the results. And there was a hard season of that in the middle of whatever this past decade for me that I was like, I'm in the Badlands and I don't know what to do. So like I'm grateful for that though, because if there's for now, but I get again noting the temptation, but I'm like, how could I ever think I'm entitled to any of these gifts? What a joy. I remember the Badlands, but that's why I think so often God in the scripture says, remember the oppression, remember where you were.
That's why you have all those monuments, that's why you have Bethel. That's why you have the 12 stones by the Jordan River. He was intending for them to build all these monuments all these altars as remembrances to guide them back. And all of us are broken humans. And so we can take something that God blesses or God works uniquely in, that we put the same effort into as the thing that didn't blow up.
Yes.
And we can forget that the difference was that God decided to work with this in a unique way, and take credit instead of give praise. And all of us are capable of that. And then when you add in the human element, all of us are vulnerable to applause and approval and, the pats on the back and the gifts and the, oh my gosh, you're so great. And can I get a picture with you? And, the emails. And again, Satan, if he can't get us with one, he'll get us with the other.
Yeah.
He also will not take something bad. He'll take something good and then corrupt it.
Right.
And that's where like God uses those things to encourage you, to strengthen you, to help keep pressing you forward. And then he'll take those things and turn them into idols, places to get into your, vainglory, pride. We both did the 7 deadly sins this spring. And, that's where those are. Almost all of those were good things and gifts that God gave us.
Right.
That we then corrupted.
Yeah, I think that was, I love that you did that. And I'm bummed we weren't able to like, hey, we're both doing this. You go preach at mine, I'll go preach at yours.
Well, and
we didn't think of that.
We did different orders. You leaned in more to the fruit of the Spirit contrast.
Yeah. We could have made it work. So that's kind of where I'm at in my season, and your season's changing. Tell me about that.
So the last time I was sitting at this table, here with you in this room, I just come off of a sabbatical. The sabbatical was not what I expected. I ended up in the hospital with a blood pressure of 199 over 120. I was dealing with intense anxiety. I was not prepared for the grief that I needed to deal with on that sabbatical. Ungrieved losses. Terry Wardle's quote, "The ministry is a series of ungrieved losses." I had a number of those that had happened, 2021, 2022. And so I spent that time working on that, which I think is what led to a renewed focus on forgiveness and healing inside my heart, but also just a confirmation of my identity, who God had called me to be. I'm now in that season that my friend Steve Carter kind of calls the danger zone, between 38 and 42, where so many people make life-altering decisions. They blow up their career, their family, their future. It's a season that Arthur Brooks talks about in From Strength to Strength, where you often begin to realize that you're not always going to be the guy or the girl, and you begin to kind of recognize that there may be a decline in some of your abilities or capacities, and you have to shift how you view your strength and your purpose and your calling. And so I've kind of been in that season. And so I was watching back our video from a year and a half recently when I was preparing to drive down here, and I was like, man, that is still me. And in many ways, I'm still in the same spots. In other areas, I've made like noticeable steps forward. And so I'm just grateful for God's grace and his faithfulness to meet us where we are, to love us there, but to not leave us there, and continue to help us grow and take steps forward. And our church is built around this idea of everybody has a next step, and obedience is as simple as taking your next step with Jesus. And so I'm grateful for the steps I can see evidenced between that conversation and this conversation.
Yeah. Sacred Fire by Ronald Rollheiser. I remember I read it when I was like 27, and I called it, because they said it's a book for people in their midlife crisis. And I was like, well, I need this for my quarter life crisis. So I read it, and a line that I thought was really helpful in it. They said in the first half of life, you struggle containing your energy. In the second half of life, you struggle maintaining energy. And excitement about life and all of that.
Hey, it rhymes, man. That was like totally in your wheelhouse.
Yes, well, I think I may have reworded it.
Rollheiser, this is a great book, but it needed some Trey.
So, context. Anytime there's a preacher or something you sees on Instagram that rhymes, he goes, this sounds like a Treyism.
Well, sometimes like when people go to like the fifth one.
Yeah.
Like I listened to a podcast this morning with Carl Lentz, who's not pastor anymore, but he talked about his daily affirmations, and they all started with H. And I was like, okay, when he went to the fifth one, I'm like, man, this is like a Trey. 2 or 3, no big deal. 5, okay.
That's hilarious. Yeah, and you sent me one recently, and I came up with a better. I was like, man, I think I got a better phrase for this guy. But then it says like, and so much of discipleship at the beginning is like, saying no to lust and this passion, and but then your second half of life, and I wonder how you see this. It's the battle of bitterness, resentment, as you're talking about with forgiveness. Dreams that you realize will never come to pass. I think it was Comer who says how young people are generally nicer because they still have hope that maybe they'll change. And then when you're older, it's like, oh, this is just who I am. Like it's like senioritis effect. And so then people allow bitterness to take over and resentment. And so I love how you're talking so much about forgiveness. I think my channel just kind of is like has shifted to talk to pastors and ministry leaders. And I really have a passion about two things, formation and leadership. And man, forgiveness is so central to all of them.
Yeah, I was driving 2 weeks ago, and I pulled up to a stoplight near our office, and a question just hit me: how am I still here? Because I have so many friends that I went to seminary with. I went to a Christian, university and did a Bible degree, so I had friends from there who went into ministry. Between college, seminary, and then my 20s, I have so many friends who just are no longer doing this.
Yeah.
And some of them are no longer following Jesus.
Wow.
Some of them are no longer married to their wife, and so I go, okay, so I don't think I'm a better person than them. I don't think somehow like God loves me more or I'm stronger. But as I looked back at the answer to that question, how am I still here? I see some very pivot points, some crossroads. And I think one of those was what I did with the pain that I experienced in the context of church. And I, at multiple points, made a decision to forgive and started doing the work on myself. It started in my mid-20s when I first started battling cynicism. It, continued when I first started realizing that I was relating to God out of performance and not as the beloved. It then moved as I, went through a season of intense anxiety when I moved to Prescott 9 years ago. And then it continued as I started really writing and sharing about forgiveness, and I realized I couldn't, share what I wasn't living myself. And so as I look back, I think part of why I'm still here is just the continual choice. Hey, I do not want to lead from anger, bitterness, and cynicism. I want to lead from healing and from hope. And I want to offer people the product of my own work, what God's doing in my soul, and help guide them down a similar path. Because I think kind of the myth of the church hurt conversation is somehow that like you can make it through church without being hurt. And it's like, I have church hurt. It was like, yeah, I mean, if you stay here long enough, it is going to happen. And that doesn't justify immoral leaders. It doesn't justify spiritual abuse. It doesn't, say, hey, it's no big deal. We're not going to victim shame here and tell people that what happened to them didn't happen, or that their feelings aren't real and they shouldn't, feel them. But at the same time, like if you're going to live in the context of community to this level, and you're going to be around people who are imperfect, some of whom are doing their work and some of whom aren't, like there is going to be hurt. Yeah. So you're going to have to deal with forgiveness. You're going to have to wrestle with reconciliation and trust, which, by the way, are not forgiveness. And you're going to have to do all that work if you want to stay, and if you want to sustain. That's part of where, I think about, your grandfather and other, older people that you were around at a young age. You often have either people who are joyful or who are bitter. And those choices were not made in their 70s.
Wow.
Those choices were made in their 30s and 40s when life broke them. And Hemingway says that, the world breaks everyone. And then some people are strong in those broken places. And I think it's not that you are broken or not, it's what happens in that broken place. Do you heal? And does that healing actually make you stronger than you were before you were broken? And I want to be the kind of person in my 70s who is not bitter and angry and a sourpuss to be around. I want to be a life-giving figure in my family with people who are looking to me for leadership and spiritual guidance. I want to be that sage, that Dallas Willard and Eugene Peterson were. And I think they were those people at the end because of what they chose in the beginning and the middle.
Man, that's really profound. That so much inspires. That is what keeps me going as well. Like I have a vision of who I can become. And that's what I love about the conversation of spiritual formation that has entered into, I think I was listening before most. Now it's cool. Now it's like
you were an
about
early
it.
adopter.
But what has intrigued me is Dallas Willard's line that's pretty bold in saying the best thing God gets out of you is who you become, not what you do. And I just see that more and more and then like when you think about a fruitful person, it's because they had that character. You do produce all sorts of fruit. But I love from the Eugene Peterson Burning in My Bones book, he had a neighbor, and I might botch this story. I've actually mentioned this several times. Videos are somewhere. So I need to go back and read it to make sure the facts are right. But here's my version, the Trey version.
I can chat GPT
and
if you want me to.
Nice. But essentially, he had an atheist neighbor or friend who was like, oh, you're a pastor? It's not going to end well for you. And so this guy painted a picture of him as if he was older. So this was when Eugene was young. And it was a picture of an old, bitter, angry, resentful man. And he wound up putting it in his office as a reminder, if I don't make these hard decisions and do the way of humility, surrender, and confession, I'm going to turn into that guy right there. So it's one thing to have a beautiful vision. It's also a thing to have this is a nasty vision. I'm not going to make decisions today that will inevitably lead me to that person tomorrow.
Well, I think we know this financially. Like if you have anybody that you know that's a financial planner, that is involved with investing or retirement, they will tell you the choices that you make in your prime earning years are the ones that shape what the end of your life looks like when it comes to your resources and what you're able to pass on. And so if that's true for our finances, it's certainly true for our formation and for our souls.
Yes, compound.
And so it's that compound choice. And I think we often, there's not a day where you go from being a young leader to not a young leader. It's coming for you, Trey. I don't know when it happened for me because I'm not a young leader anymore. I'll be 41 next month. Mm-hmm. Craig Groeschel tells a story about I think I went to lunch on a Tuesday and I came back and I was no longer a young leader.
I will say last night we were at dinner with me and my wife for date night and we're like, everyone's old. We have their interests, and I had fun with all of them. So
well, and that's where. So because there's not a moment where you go from being the young leader to not the young leader, you don't often realize that you're in that season where you're making those choices that are setting the trajectory of your future. If Eugene hadn't had that guy paint him that picture, he wouldn't have known that he was making choices that shaped his face in the future, And so I think that's a gift when you can be in community with people who are older than you or be in community with people who just reflect back to you in an honest way, the truth of where you're at. And I just would encourage people, not in a burdening, putting something on you that crushes you, but recognize the choices that you are making are continually shaping the person you become. And so you cannot choose what other people do to you. You cannot choose what's going to happen to you. But as Viktor Frankl says, in between stimulus, and response, there is a space. And in that space is our choice and our freedom. And so we get to choose what we're going to do with what happened to us. And it is often our response to what happens to us, collaborating with the Holy Spirit, that shapes us to become the kind of person we become, who is either that life-giving tree in Psalm 1 or that nasty picture that Eugene had in his office.
Yeah. So Morris Dirks, I mentioned this in my book, and I was like, I couldn't remember how I titled him, so I had to go pick it up. But Morris Dirks calls it the crisis of limitation. So a lot of people experience it in their middle age. I am not all that. Or a disease happens, all sorts of different limiting experiences. And what I talk about in the book, essentially, you have 3 decisions. What the decisions you make now turn into these types of people. One is the wounded pastor, and so it kills your dreams and visions. You just okay, I'm not going to risk anymore. That was hard. I'm just going to be wounded. I might be a keyboard warrior and be mad about all these other churches that are doing well. The other one is a conceited pastor, where you're like Uncle Rico. You just say, I am not limited. I can throw this football over that mountain still. And we've all met those, right? Where it's man, I'm amazing. It's I don't care. I'm going to ignore the facts. I'm great. And actually, narcissists they know how to make a following, and it's really sad, and it's how a lot of people are damaged. But my vision is so I was I don't want to become a wounded pastor. Then wounded people wound people. I don't want to become a conceited pastor, because that's not the way of the Lord. It's the way of humility and love and care. So I want to recognize I'm a limited pastor. I'm just not, I'm limited in what I can do, and that's okay. So therefore, look, I love the Pete Scazzaro line, answering people, because people are saying this to me more and more often, I know you're busy. And Pete Scazzaro says to answer people, no, it's not that I'm busy. I'm just limited. I just can't do everything. And just embracing that, what I have found, it actually has shifted my mind. Oh, my main job as a pastor is not to minister to people, which I do, but it's ministering through people and empowering others to do the work of the ministry, Ephesians 4.
I think also that the world tells us today that our path to, I'm just going to bunny quote, success is by pursuing everything. So in addition to being a pastor, I'm also an author. And so there is this pressure to be on every platform, to have a massive following on every platform, to be everywhere. But Rory Vaden, who we both have interacted with, who's a great branding coach.
I'm now listening to his book. Now that you told me about it.
Which, by the way, his book is if you listen to his book, it's free right now. He used AI for the initial version of it, so you're like listening to a voice that sounds like him and his wife, but it's AI. It's
There's moments where you can totally tell. Like, oh, this is the wrong tone.
Yeah.
But
well, one of his key ideas, the AI mispronounced the name of the person it's named after. I go, oh, that's how I know it's AI, because Rory would never say it that way. But in some of his teaching, he talks about this idea that if you have diluted focus, you will get diluted results. And he said, hey, if you're trying to break through as a mission-driven messenger, you're going to have to pick an area to focus. Because if you want to break through a brick wall, the goal is not to hit every part of the wall with your sledgehammer. The goal is to pick one part of the wall and hit that consistently with patience and perseverance until the wall begins to crack and you break through. And then once you get through that part of the wall, the whole wall will fall down.
Interesting.
And so in the same way, like I think when we embrace our limitedness, we're embracing actually the counterintuitive process to breakthrough. I am going to embrace that I have limits. I'm going to focus my efforts. I'm going to lead not only through my time, effort, and energy and resources and knowledge, but through others. And through that focus and giving up these other things, I actually will have a greater impact. It'll be a slower, longer process to that. And in that middle, you may go through a Badlands or wilderness experience where you think about giving up and you look at other people who are further along or somehow they got the breakthrough that you didn't get. But if you go through that process, that's the process of fruitfulness, but you have to focus before you get the fruitfulness. And we often want the fruitfulness without the focus or before the focus.
That's so helpful. I think that's the difference. Again, you said this before we press record. I think that's one of the key differences of my life when it comes to my church and my channel. Like I've realized like, oh, I don't have to be all things to all people. I can't be. So what do I, looking back, examining my life and my skill sets and passions, but also people's feedback, like, okay, this is our church. We're not here to make attenders. We're here to make disciples. And yeah, it's kind of interesting. We are a practice-based church. I'll just name it out loud and tell you, maybe you don't want to go here. And if not, let us help you go find another place. I'm just like more and more comfortable with that. And even my channel, like I'm not thinking like, what's viral? It's like, okay, no, like totally. I truly don't care about that anymore. But what can be like really valuable to this type of person that I want to help? I actually have 3 friends in my life. All their names are Tim, and one Tim is a little bit younger than me. The other Tim is almost my exact. I mean, he is my age, same stage of life, a lot of things. And I got another Tim that's older. And I always think like, okay, if this content blesses all 3 Tims, like that's what I want to do. And so I thought about starting my channel every time, hey Tim, and and then people are like, what is that? So my wife's like, don't do that. But it is like, it helps focus. Like, hey, I can't bless everybody or make content for everybody, but what a joy to think about them and how I can empower them.
There is a lifespan development component of that, and then there's a spiritual component of that. There's a lifespan development of that I think when you are in your 20s, you're trying to figure out who you are. When you're in your 30s, you're trying to be successful. You hit 40, and sometimes people get this a little bit earlier, sometimes a little bit later.
Is the word significant?
Well, it's significant, but I think it's also a level of self-confidence that you step into that, in the unhealthy people, it's, kind of, they have no filter and they don't care anymore, and pushes people away. In the good side of it, I think it's, hey, I know who I am. I know who I'm not. I'm not looking for you to make me feel secure. I'm now just going to be who God made me to be, and I'm going to let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
And so I think in lifespan, you're kind of moving into that season now, which I think 5-8 years ago, you couldn't have said, hey, this is who we are as a church. This is who God's called us to be. If that's not for you, that's great. We'll help you find another church here in the East Valley.
Yeah.
You needed those people.
I'd have been lying.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of that is the stage of your church. Some of it is also the stage of your own growth. Where now you can say that. So I think there's a lifespan development. There's also a spiritual component of that where I think it's embracing your God-given identity. And I think we undersell the process involved to claim and develop your identity in Christ. I think we often go, well, it's just believing the gospel, and it's yes, and it's allowing that to infect and transform every area of your life that has been affected by other people when it comes to identity formation. And I think we get through that teens, 20s, and 30s period. That's at least 15 years.
Right.
If you built that kind of identity that the world would give you, you're not going to unlearn and rebuild your God-given identity, your identity in Christ, in a quarter or a year. It's going to be a slow process of unlearning and relearning, tearing down and reforming.
Yeah.
And so I think that people would be wise to say, hey, part of my work, if they're in this season, or maybe they're just struggling in general, going, hey, I think something needs to change, is to come back to, who does God say that I am? How can I begin to recognize that from Scripture, meditate on it, and then begin to press it into and apply it to every area of their life? Because if you know what Willard and Peterson say is true, that what you do flows out of who you are, then that place you should be attentive to, that foundation you're always working on, is who am I? Because if something infects who am I, it will show up in what I do. It will wound people. It will hurt people. I will do the right things for the wrong reasons. I'll become an unhealthy or toxic leader. And that's why for me, this season has been a renewal of, hey, this is who God made me to be. I'm going to embrace it. Some people aren't going to like it. But God, is this who you've made me to be and how you've wired me and what you've called me to? Okay, then I'm just going to continue to renew that every day and allow what I do in this season to flow from that.
How do you encourage? So I've noticed the theme in this conversation, and I love, because I need it, and I know it's because you're talking to me. How do you encourage those who are in their 60s and 70s and they did make those mistakes? You know, because you're saying like, hey, you know, by the time you're 70, like I heard, I think it was Dr. Crawford Loritz that says, when you're born, you look like your parents. And when you die, you look like your decisions. You know, so like, but like balancing, because I think you do a good job of that. You think about every person in your congregation. How do you give that message of hope to their people in the 20s? Like, hey, what you're doing right now matters.
Well, it's funny. I tend to speak to people in their 20s more online, people more to 60s in my church because of where I live. And I try to encourage people that if it's a cliche, but if you're not dead, then God is not
You're
done.
not done. Yeah.
And I try to really help people see real life examples from the Scriptures, whether we're talking about Caleb at 80, who's saying, give me the hardest territory, whether we're seeing Samson, you know, bloodied and blind, asking God, give me this one last opportunity to be used by you. Whether we're seeing John get the revelation, you know, at the end of his life, you know, or even, you know, Elijah having to work on humility at the end of his life because Elisha is going to do double the miracles that you do. And so you see all of these people throughout the Scriptures who are not in the early life stage, who are having to still learn, grow, and change, and some of whom are asking God for new opportunities and fresh perspective, or even a fresh, you know, inspiration or download of courage, vision, passion. And I'm so excited when I watch people do things for the first time and experience the joy that comes from that, to go, hey, like, yeah, there may be a date, you know, on your birth certificate that says this is where you are, but don't allow that to become a limiter. There are some realities. Yes, your decisions are going to be present in your face and your relationships. But if we really believe in a God that can raise the dead, like, there is still an opportunity for you to learn, to grow, to heal, to change. It may not be as expansive as you would like. You know, you may not be able to go back and undo all those decisions. You may not be able to change those people's minds. You know, you may not be able to start your career over and then have 2 more decades to do things. But you still have an opportunity today here to make a decision, and that decision always has a bigger ramification than you realize.
That's really good. One paradigm that we've kind of held on to this past year when we're going through Acts, I noticed it time and time again. We now have this phrase in our church, moments and marathons. So it's this idea that change happens in moments. And so like we want those to be on Sundays. Like we set up the environment and space, and we have expectancy for God to move. And also in our groups, like we believe in moments for sure, and we want to highlight those, but also through the marathon of training to become like him. And so like, yeah, just encouraging both. Like to the older, sometimes you just need a moment of complete transformation. And I think by the grace of God, you'd be surprised how much you can transform even this month. But at the same time, the true, genuine growth, hey, you guy in your 20s, you're signing up for a relay race that's longer than a marathon, you know?
Well, and I think we need to make sure that we don't, we trust God to work in people's hearts. Like for some people, they need to wrestle with what has happened in the past. They need to deal with forgiveness, regret, grace, and we need to not protect them from that and allow God, hey, if I trust that God is as good as he is and he loves them more than me, he's more committed to them than I am, then I'm going to trust as they kind of flesh out what this looks like in their own life. But we also need to make sure that sometimes, we can, in our stridency and our passion, can quickly move into guilt and shame and condemnation. And we need to remind people of the hope. Yes, God can change a life, a relationship, a circumstance in an instant. He may be able to do that in this situation. He certainly can. He may do that. And it may also be a process. And so I don't know how God is going to work. All I know is that my responsibility is to do the next right thing. And so if that's to go ask for forgiveness, if that's to embrace a new habit, if that's to learn a new skill, if that's to go to counseling for the first time at 72, I'm going to do that and trust that God is going to be responsible for the outcome. I'm just going to be obedient to what he's shown me to do next.
I want to make a shift. So our behind the scenes conversations, a couple things you've really helped me with is like the staff side of things, and even just like my own personal, okay, what does it mean to be a lead pastor? How do I organize my time? What does it mean to have an assistant? All those things, and I'm really grateful for that. What's like a recent thing you've been learning, or what do you think, even just knowing where I'm at in the season? I feel like you kind of know where we're at as a church. That's really helpful, like on the staff side, and like managing, leading people. I know you didn't come in thinking that. I know this is a curveball.
Yeah.
But you're just filled with that wisdom. So
I have two. I tend to be the kind of person that I love new. I love teaching new. I love exploring new. I am not somebody who naturally is a repeater. And so I would say I am being reminded in this season just how much I need to be what Lencioni calls the chief repeating officer. I have to say the same things over and over again. And for me, I go, yeah, well, that's being lazy. If I was really working hard, I come up with something new. And it's like, no. It actually is harder to keep finding fresh ways to say old things. It's actually harder to stay focused in this distracted world, to stay on message, to stay on point, to find new and fresh ways and creative ways to communicate the same basic ideas to people. And I think in this world, people don't take it seriously until they hear it repeatedly.
Yeah.
And so for me, part of it is with my staff, with my board, with my church, is just continuing to hit on the same things over and over and over again, and having some discipline to be able to do that, because my natural undisciplined self is just all over the board. So
I had a coach that told me, along with that line, he says, you should be so consistent as a leader that when someone on your team has a problem, they already know what you're going to say. Like that, yeah, he says this every time when we have this situation, not to be stale. And again, not to be flexible in a moment, but there's still like, no, you're a principled person. The same things are the same things.
I think if people are able to like mock you,
yeah,
like, whether it's, how Dave Ramsey starts his show every time, or how he responds to questions, whether it's how a pastor, takes Q&A, there's just, there's a way that you say things. And if people can kind of put a costume on, mimic you, and the whole room is dying because they nail you, then you've been repeated yourself enough that everybody knows exactly what they're doing.
Have you seen that Instagram trend where people go like, hey, say the things that your pastor says? And I was like, I don't know if I do enough of those. I'm not sure.
Well, that was super convicting for me, because I was like, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what people would say. I don't think that there is something. Our staff had a conversation. We did some merch earlier this year, and we were talking about putting on statements that are kind of core to our church. And I realized, we don't have enough of those, because I'm not disciplined enough to stay on point. So that was really convicting. The other thing that has been God's been working with me on, in addition to repeating, is I am really good at challenging myself to grow and making sure that I have new opportunities. I'm continuing to refine my process. We discussed this a little before we got on camera, but I think it's also making room for your people too. Like I'm always looking to say, hey, I want to stay challenged. I want to stay motivated. I want to stay inspired. Though my title may not change, I'm going to continue to do that. I have to be doing that for my people too. Because I think if people don't feel like there's a continual opportunity for them to grow in their role, then they will go find another role.
Right.
And so I think that especially in this era where it feels like less people are wanting to work for churches and churches are having to, compete more on comp, there are certain times where, you're not going to win the comp battle. People could go somewhere and make more money, get better benefits. But if they're being challenged, if they're being cared for, if they're continuing to grow, that can mitigate to a degree that other piece. So I don't want to ever they're not my people, they're God's. They're mine for a season. I am their interim leader. I want to be a steward of them. At the same time, I want to also make sure that I'm continually challenging them to grow so that they continue to feel like, hey, I can see a pathway for myself here. And I think sometimes because I get so caught up in my world and what I'm doing and for myself, I go, hey, people want that too. May not look like me or to all the different kind of components that I do, but everyone wants to grow. Everyone wants to move forward. Everyone wants to be able to see their future. And if you can't help them do that, then they begin to think, well, I kind of feel stuck here. There's nowhere for me to grow. And then, I'm not making as much as I would like, or there's not as much opportunities here. And that's where those things there. So I want to continue to see my team grow, stretch. I believe in them. I want them to feel that and go, hey, how can I help you expand?
Oh, I love that. I sat in the book of Acts all of last year. We preached through it. And when I was going into the life of Barnabas, as I was studying it, something really leapt off the page. It's really cool because the church in Antioch, actually Barnabas is the one who starts it. And then he goes, actually, I remember God calls Saul. He's still Saul at that point. I'm going to go grab him. I'm going to go travel 90 miles east, say, hey, Saul of Tarsus, you were called the Gentiles. This is the first ever Gentile church. Come do this with me. Because it even shows Barnabas was killing it. He was doing great work. But then he kind of takes a step back and allows Saul to flourish. And then you just see the rest of their journey, and they do have a little bit of a tiff, right? But it's that whole Barnabas is willing to platform someone else ahead of him. And so I remember as I was prayer walking that it was last summer, and I was praying, and of course, and I love that we can just be honest with the Lord. I was like, Lord, give me a Barnabas. Give me more Barnabases in my life that are here to help me and to, and then... Which shout out to those, shout out to the Barnabases of our life. We all have some too. But then I was like, oh, wow. It's just the Holy Spirit just slapped me, just like what you just did on the head. I was like, God, what if you're calling me to be the Barnabas? And I started, I came up with 5 names of people that I can be their Barnabas for them. And just realizing from strength to strength, actually that's the longer term play of joy. How amazing to be the guy that lifts others up and puts them in incredible spots where they get to flourish.
And it doesn't have to be either or.
Yeah,
they flourish or I flourish.
Yes.
Or, God uses them or God uses me. It's both.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that that's part of the challenge I see in so many people who seem to be gaining platform and influence today is I just continue to see a lack of humility. And I'm not here to say that Scott is the king of humility. I'm not. I tell my kids, if somebody tells you they're humble, they're not.
Yeah. What about Moses?
Moses writing about his humility is a little bit like John writing about his running speed.
Yes.
That he's faster than Peter,
The one he loved.
The Bible is both human and it is divine.
Exactly.
Those are the human elements. But I think that we are in an era where even in the church, we're rewarding people who lack humility. And I think the long-term effect of that is going to be revealed, and it's not going to be fun.
Why is it so attractive to people? Because I just sniff that out. Pride is so gross to me. And I know we all have it, but when I see, I'm like, why are people following that leader? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, I think there's the fact that people love, in an age of chaos, they love certainty. in an age of people not committing to a position and not knowing where people stand, somebody who just comes up and says it, quote unquote, they tell it like it is, there's a attractiveness to that. That clarity, draws people. I do think that we reward, the strongest, the most boldest, whether they're right or wrong, takes in this kind of attention economy. And so it's very easy to build a platform and a following because people either love hating on somebody who disagrees with them, or they love cheering for somebody who's doing or saying what they lack the courage to do. Tell them, buddy. Yeah, you tell them, And so it's like, if given the platform, you wouldn't do that, but you love that somebody else is doing it. And so I think that there is a part of kind of this cultural moment where we're coming out of a season of just incredible confusion, uncertainty, chaos, that people who just, turn a gray world into black and white, who turn a chaotic world into a clear, organized world. And we love people who can kind of help us feel some modicum of security and stability in the midst of all that. Now, the challenge becomes that they lack the fruit of the Spirit. The challenge becomes that eventually you end up on the receiving end of that same thing. Tell them becomes, oh no, they're telling me.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think there is, a reckoning that comes with all of that. And we've now been at it long enough that we've seen people rise and fall through that. And so it's just like, you kind of know what's coming. Like, it's just a matter of time. Or they abandon that person. The person, ends up either falling on their own, or they end up being, eaten and consumed by the machine that they help build. And so that's why I think you mentioned you read that book about Peterson every year. I mean, I read Keller's little book.
Self-Forgetfulness?
Yep.
Yes.
It's 50 pages. It's more of a pamphlet than a book. And it's just this reminder that, hey, like, part of the calling for us is to continue to find our worth and value in him and not in ourselves. There's that quote from Count Zinzendorf, the founder of the Moravian Revolution, preach the gospel, die and be forgotten. Matt Chandler says the man goes in the ground and the message goes on. And so part of it is just having a sobering either community around you, having sobering voices, or just having then a sobering experience that goes, hey, like, eventually I'm going to be forgotten. Eventually they're not going to gravitate to me. And so if I start walking in humility now, back to kind of how we started with formation, if I start walking in humility now, everything in the future gets easier. Succession gets easier. My church going from growth to decline, the patterns of people, all that becomes easier when you live with more surrender and more humility. And so I just think for me, it's almost like I'm just investing in my future. I'm making my future easier by walking this path.
Those who gain their life will lose it, but those who lose their life for my sake will find it and gain it. Wow, that's really hopeful. We need to go to lunch.
Do you have? I have one question for you.
Yes.
So what is something that you are excited about for this channel in this season that you haven't shared about?
Okay. I'm in the middle of a behind the scenes of making a resource. I want to be helpful to pastors. Essentially, what I'm excited about is there's 3 things I'm working on. I can name 2 of them. So one is looking back at the story of what happened to California. It was actually a pivotal moment for me. And it just took a while to figure out, and discern after that turbulent wave. But we decided at the end of 2022, me and Caleb, my other associate pastor, were like, hey, what if our church just has a year left anyways? Like, why are we like trying to hold on to it? I had just learned to let go of it. So let's just start risking. Let's just start doing things that are uncomfortable. So we wound up doing a lot of things. We pretty much emptied our whole bank account to start meeting on a school in the mornings and do the whole portable thing again and all of that. But along the way, looking back, we created 2 pathways. We made an attender pathway. We made it very easy, very clear for people, from like the plan your visit, like ads online, to what do I do when I first get here? What are my next 4 steps? We made that super clear. We've been refining it for the last 3 years. In fact, we're even unveiling a new name for it this next month, but we think it's more and more clear. So we've really enjoyed that. And then a discipleship pathway. So we're about to end our 3-year journey of the 9 practices, and I'm excited to kind of unveil soon what the next iteration of this is. But I want to use this channel as a moment to reflect and to help other pastors, because I think there's constantly this tension, and you help me with this a lot, of being a Sunday director and a spiritual director, and a staff director. That's my third thing, and all sorts of other directors. But that whole idea, like, man, I use seminary, and this is what it's for. I never was taught, like, how do you actually get people to come to church, though? Like, how do you make it easy for non-believers to even think it's safe to go to your place? So, like, we are Sunday directors. If they're not coming, there's no other thing we can do to actually help make them into disciples. But, like, trying to figure out what does discipleship look like in the modern age? What does this look like in the health of, like, a healthy pastor? How do we lead the way? I love that Ruth Haley Barton line: the best gift you can give to the people you lead is your own transforming self. So yeah, it's still in, like, dream phase, but my goal is just to create more content on this channel that helps pastors who feel like, how do I live in that tension of, like, I want to get creative and smart and getting more people to come. But man, more than that, I don't want to just make attenders. I want to make disciples. So just kind of sharing my learnings and interviewing people like you, who are kind of have that same like-mindedness. Yeah, I love that question. Any pushback, thoughts?
No, I love that. I mean, I'm glad that you're not waiting until you finish the 3-year journey to share. I'm grateful that you're not, like, waiting till, like, you figured it all out and you've arrived. You're, like, still kind of in process. And I think in an era where your only option was to write a book, then you kind of needed to have it all figured out. Now, because of the tools we have available, you can create, you can share in process, and bring people on the journey. I think it's more authentic. I think it's faster. Speed's important.
True.
And I think it's a really wise and good stewardship of both your story and the resources you have. So.
And I'm also learning, though, I can't document everything.
No. Well, I mean, there is a place for editing.
I used to do that.
There is a place for editing. There is a place for, Beth Moore's comment, be authentic with all, transparent with some, vulnerable with few.
Yes.
And so I think there's a place to have that discernment. But I think also it's, hey, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to figure it all out.
Yeah.
You got to be a little bit farther than some people, and you got to have some clarity. Mm-hmm. And then you just bring them with you on the journey.
Yeah. And I've also thought, like, some sort of community with the paywall, because I've had several conversations with pastors, and they're like, hey, can you not upload that? Because it's like, hey, my board might see this, and so some regret. And so it's like, man, I want to create this safe community where it's like, you have to have a pastor's email to be in. You have to vet you before. But, like, can we, like, learn from each other? But it's scary out there. You don't want some random members to see sometimes of, like, what you're in the middle of. It's just not wise sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I'm kicking around. But tell me about you, what you're working on. How can our people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on some of the socials, not all of the socials. Some of the socials, Scott Savage Alive. My site is scottsavagealive.com. I've got 2 resources that have come out of my journey since we last talked, Trey. One of those is my Forgiveness Journey workbook that walks people through how do you heal from your hurt, and how do you discern the difference between forgiveness, reconciliation, and trust, because they're 3 separate pieces of the process. And so I walk people through the tools I discovered when I went through a deep season of betrayal in the church. And that workbook was great. I led people from my church through it this spring, and just the feedback was incredible. And then the second thing is I have a new resource that is just coming out this month called the Identity Statement Blueprint. And I basically help people take what the scripture says about them, and over a 21-day process, really begin to embed that into their daily life and how they see themselves. And I've made that available at Pay What You Can. And so it's there's literally, it's $1 minimum, both of those are my website, and you can get access to those. And I'm just excited for the feedback I'm already getting from people who are using them. I know they work because I have used them before I even created them, or I'm now making them available. And I'm just excited to help people experience hope and healing in those places.
I love that you're doing the same thing. It's just like, let me take my story, my experience. I've worked through some things, not claiming to be an expert, but here are things that have got me to this point. So I love that. And also, you're on YouVersion. So
I'm on YouVersion.
There's a high chance people have read your plan.
Yeah. So you just search Scott Savage Bible or Scott Savage YouVersion. You'll find my stuff on there. I'm uploading 2 or 3 new plans a month. And on my partner page, I've got my stuff categorized where you can look for topics that are of interest to you, and then you can kind of binge through, my plans to be able to do that. I try to kind of live in that space between, personal, practical, and biblical. So I'm going to keep it real. It's going to be rooted in the scriptures, but then we're going to have really tangible next steps.
You just did 3 R's right there.
Oh, I didn't.
Keep it real.
Keep it relevant.
Relevant, and then he said really. So anyway,
really biblical.
It's really biblical.
Really biblical.
But I did notice ABCs earlier. You said anger, bitterness,
and cynicism.
Cynicism. Yep. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I make fun of him because I have a little bit of that in me,
We've got those Baptist roots, brother.
Oh man, it's hard to escape your roots, man.
All right, thank you for your time. Hey guys, comment down below your favorite takeaway, things that you're processing. If you made it all the way here, you're incredible. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching today's video. This is the video I think you should watch. This is the video YouTube says you should watch.